เราไปพบกับฝ่ายเสนอกันก่อนนะคะมี3ท่านด้วยกันวันนี้ทุกท่านคะปรบมือต้อนรับท่านแรกกับฝ่ายเสนอคุณสาริสาพึ่งรัตน์ค่ะเชิญค่ะและท่านต่อมาคุณประพิชดาชาวสวนเยาวชนของเรานะและอีกหนึ่งท่านฝ่ายเสนอค่ะต้อนรับไอซิสจานจิงอึงนะคะมารู้จักฝ่ายค้านกันบ้างท่านแรกค่ะต้อนรับคุณสกลพัฒน์เอี่ยมเสมอฝ่ายค้านมี2ท่านนะคะที่จะมาดีเบตกันท่านที่2ต้อนรับคุณเพชรกิจชเอกชัยค่ะและแน่นอนของเราบุคคลที่เป็นคนกลางสื่อกลางที่จะคอยห้ามปรามกับการโต้ในครั้งนี้กับ The Great Debate ต้อนรับผู้จัดการทีมคุณนิรุตจารุไพศาลกิจค่ะแล้วก็โอ๊ตมอบไปที่นี้ให้กับคุณนิรุตไปเลยสำหรับช่วงของ The Great Debate เชิญคุณนิรุตค่ะ
สวัสดีผู้ชมทุกท่านนะครับผมนิรุติจารุไพศาลกิจเป็นผู้จัดการทีมโต้สาระวาทีชาติประจำประเทศไทยนะครับวันนี้ก็รู้สึกได้เป็นเกียรติอย่างยิ่งนะครับที่เราจะได้มาทำ The Great Debate a Summary of Today's Highlight ซึ่งแพนเนลตรงนี้เนี่ยก็คือเราจะมาโชว์เป็น Exhibition Debate กล่าวคือเรานำนักเรียนที่มี potential เป็นระดับทีมชาตินะครับนักเรียนทั้งหมดเนี่ยเป็นระดับมัธยมมาจากโรงเรียนอินเตอร์หรือโรงเรียนมัธยมในประเทศไทยนะครับทั้งหมดนี้เราได้มีโอกาสไปแข่งในหลายประเทศมามากครับในปี 2023 เราได้ไปแข่งที่เวียดนาม 2024 เราได้ไปแข่งที่เซอร์เบียและหนึ่งในผู้ที่มาดีเบตวันนี้เนี่ยได้ไปกับเราในฐานะทีมชาติในปี 2025 ที่พานามาซิตี้ประเทศพานามาครับขอเสียงตบมือให้น้องๆทุกท่านด้วยครับหัวข้อของเราในวันนี้นะครับmotion หรือญัตติของเราคือ This House would abandon the narrative of staying forever young in favor of one of aging gracefully เป็นการเทียบระหว่างความเชื่อหนึ่งว่าการที่เป็นวัยเยาว์ตลอดไปจะดีกว่าหรือแย่กว่ามีข้อดีข้อเสียอย่างไรถ้าเทียบกับว่าเราค่อยๆมีอายุตามกาลเวลาไปเรื่อยๆนะครับเพื่อไม่เป็นการเสียเวลาผมขอเชิญ Prime Minister หรือผู้เสนอคนแรกขึ้นมาเริ่มดีเบตเลยครับ
The world today pushes us to stay forever young. The message is clear. The older you get, the less valuable you are. On a side proposition, we say this is wrong. Society should embrace a different narrative that focuses on a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, adapting to changes instead of resisting them, or in other words, aging gracefully. In today's world, the problem is that people reject aging. They fear it, conceal it, and spend enormous amounts of money to fix it. And sometimes they also discriminate against it. But more on this later. Firstly though, on setup. What does the narrative of staying forever young look like? The narrative of staying forever young is the glorification of youth and beauty, creating a narrative that equates aging with decline and loss, something to fight, deny, or reverse. It applies worth, value, and social acceptance to age itself. And youthful traits like being carefree, wrinkle-free, energetic becomes the ideal standard. Now, how has this narrative manifest in status quo? It looks like people dyeing gray hair or buying expensive creams to cover up wrinkles. It also looks like employers filtering out older applicants. Or in social media, where youth is equated to desirable and older is invisible. The media constantly pushes before and after transformations, associating youth with attractiveness and aging with letting yourself go, pushing these anti-aging products onto consumers. And we also see this narrative in the rise and prevalence of beauty and aesthetic clinics. On our side, our counterfactual is the narrative of aging gracefully. What does this mean? This means accepting physical evolution as natural and meaningful. For example, accepting that smile lines meant you lived a happy life or gray hairs as wisdom. People invest in meaningful self-care like meditation, exercise, nutrition, or learning new skills. But secondly, it also means embracing maturity. People value resilience, groundedness, and perspective that only comes with lived years. But thirdly, though, policies that promote active aging, like for example, having retraining programs for older people, enforcing lifelong learning, and an inclusive workforce. Lastly, instead of chasing appearance, on our side, we focus on a balance like preventative medicine, mental well-being, and strong relationships. Our job in this debate is twofold. Firstly, is to prove that the narrative of staying forever young is problematic, and secondly, how the narrative of aging gracefully is a better alternative. Moving on to my first argument. My first argument is titled, "The Forever Young Narrative Fuels Unhealthy Lifestyles." 4 key points under this. 1, the demonization of aging. Aging is constantly equated with loss of beauty, strength, productivity, and even relevance. Media reinforces ads and frames wrinkles as problems. Hair dye is marketed as covering shame, and anti-aging products use language like fight aging, battle wrinkles, or reverse time. On the comparative, though, aging gracefully makes aging a respected process because there is no stigma with aging. People can gain status rather than lose it as they age. Second, then, on comparison culture. Under the forever young narrative, constant media exposure causes people to measure their self-worth by looking younger than their peers. Women are also more vulnerable because of the double standard within this narrative. More often than not, a 50-year-old man is regarded as distinguished,
Point.
while a woman is labeled as past her prime. This becomes an industry strategy. For example, ads target women more aggressively, and workplaces also penalize them earlier. Industries also exploit this standard, pushing women harder into security. Before I move on, I can take a point.
We see that in the status quo, people who are old are already people who are already respected and are held to a higher regard anyways. So who is it exactly that's demonizing them?
But even if we do concede that people regard this experience, it's social media and like this pervasive narrative that tells people that the way you look like your appearance causes you to have less value because people are less confident. And confident based upon hiding or denying who you are as you age is still fragile. But I'll go on more in my argument. Thirdly, then, on exploitative capitalism. Under Forever Young, cosmetic industries profit by selling these insecurities. For example, ads with age-defying rhetoric. This can be seen through the surge of endless booster shots, collagen powders, Botox, vitamins marketed without evidence. Or for example, in gym and diet industries, where they capitalize on this fear of losing youth. And influencers also edit themselves into unrealistic perfection, then selling products to fix the flaws they exaggerated. While aging gracefully on our side shifts this capital into healthful spending. For example, checkups, nutrition, mental well-being, rather than fear-driven consumerism. But fourthly then, on distorted priorities. When visible aging is stigmatized, people often confuse looking young with being healthy. Women spend on fillers instead of cholesterol checkups, and men spend their money on hair implants instead of cancer screenings. But under healthcare level, young doctors are lured into cosmetic or dermatology/aesthetics because it's more profitable and you make more money, leaving a shortage in geriatricians and palliative care specialists. Real problems like Alzheimer's, cancer, cardiovascular disease lose talent and visibility while people's focus and shift towards Botox and cosmetic procedures as they age. The impact here is twofold. Firstly, on a personal level, This narrative of forever young causes excessive spending and normalizes risky lifestyles like extreme diets and cosmetic risks. Mental health and self-esteem also decline for the elderly because of stress, invisibility, and loss of dignity. On a second level, society, human capital is wasted because older people are undervalued at work, discarding decades of experience because employers want this youthfulness, they want these new perspectives, and this discards these experiences. And capital is also misallocated because industries profit from insecurity, while healthcare is skewed towards profit-driven cosmetics rather than life-saving fields. And lastly, on why the forever young narrative reduces society and respect for the elderly, which would directly respond to their POI. Firstly, this narrative feeds into ageist stereotypes. Ageism is the concept of valuing productivity, a youthful look, speed, and ignoring the experience, wisdom, and emotional debt that comes with age, which not only include old people, but the traits itself too. It frames older people as stiff, tired, out of touch, and declining in worth, which undermines and overshadows values like maturity, stability, and wisdom. This is problematic because it undermines human dignity by treating the elderly as less valuable and not equal. You see them as less, and you don't treat them with the same respect you would treat younger people. This lacks in public and elderly-friendly support, and old people have to face discrimination and slurs in the first place. Overall, though, aging gracefully allows people to accept themselves and live healthier, which is why we ought to abandon the narrative of staying forever young and embracing aging gracefully. Never been prouder to propose.
Test. Okay. Proposition tells people that it is okay to give up on themselves only because it is inevitable. We oppose this and say that you should give it your best to stay young and be the most lively version of yourself. We agree that the narrative of aging gracefully is beneficial, but it should not come at the cost of abandoning a very lively and a natural narrative of one that say that it's matter for you to stay young in a way that you want. So for 2 points of setup then, I'm going to put forward 2 substantive. First, on why the narrative of forever young gives us a notion of hope and ambition to people, and second of all, why the aging gracefully narrative is a narrative of the privileged and is unable to grasp by the average individual. Firstly then, in setup, what the forever young narrative looks like. I think the definition of it exists on a spectrum, that it can be the literal meaning of anti-aging technologies or the literal biology age of an individual, or secondly, it could be in a way that said, for example, age doesn't define your worth, or that you can remain energetic, relevant, creative, and active even if you grow old age-wise. That it is about the attitude and the mental perspective you have on your own life and how you want to live your life. And I think this manifests in 2 ways. One, it could be in a way that things like fitness culture or a more healthier lifestyle being promoted because we need people to stay young, energetic, and healthy within their own social landscape. But second of all, it could look like manifest in things like the narrative of the media, telling people to live their best life, even if they are technically biologically old. I think it's still important. If proposition want to say that their narrative can be defined by the people themselves, I think there's equal incentive under outside the house that things like companies will allow people to choose for themselves and what's the meaning and what's the definition of these forever young narratives that exist. Before I go into my arguments, 2 responses then. One, I think this debate was never about medical institutions and how we push out things like medicines that already exist and will have symmetric incentive insofar that there's equal political capital and things like concern by the government and the state to do so. But second of all, I think the status quo already exists a narrative and a notion that we put virtue on the one that are already older because they are seen as kind of experiences more stuff already and are more wise in terms of lived experience. So I think this narrative, even if it exists and even if it is true that proposition want to say that it is an active demonization, I think it's just a counterbalance of what already exists. To my first argument then on why the narrative of Forever Young gives out a notion of hope and ambition to people. 3 things to note under this. I think this is the premise of this is that this is how the people interpret and then act upon the narrative when it is spread. 1, I think when there's an aspiration to stay young, there's an active demand for research in things like biotechnologies or things like regenerative medicine that exist and is more urgent under outside the house because people and narrative as a whole can subscribe to this narrative and push out for things like private research to have an incentive, an economic incentive to research on these things which exist and matters. On government worlds, you lose the urgency in funding when aging is seen as natural and less importance insofar that they tell you it's inevitable and in a way cannot be changed. Second thing under this is that I think when there's an ideal for things like to stay forever young, it was an ideal push for things like exercise, to eat healthy and to stay active for yourself. Because that is how you stay forever young under outside the house. Because when you eat healthy and eat good enough nutrients, you're able to remain the best version of yourself and remain in a way the version of you since you are young and you can live longer under outside the house, rather than the comparative on proposition where you accept the decline and yes, you might age gracefully in a way, but I think it is in a way that is less active and then less incentive of urgency as opposed to the narrative under outside the house. The last notion I want to talk about is the psychological agency of the people, that it gives a sense of control and malleable of the life under outside the house, that they can choose a lifestyle that matters to them and then keep them forever young, because that is a choice that needs to remain for the people to choose whether they want to age gracefully or whether they want to stay forever young. Those things like active exercise that exist. I think the comparative on proposition is that people lose motivation because they tell them that they cannot choose to stay forever young. They have to age gracefully. When they abandon an entire narrative, I think the impact is simple. They alienate a group of people, the people that want to stay young, the people who yearn for this narrative, which will exist under outside the house. Then, to my second argument then on why aging gracefully is a narrative of the privileged. 1, I think if you look at the world right now, the reason people are able to age gracefully and do things like retirement early or take good care of yourself when you're old and not be a burden with your family or your own community is that you have to be privileged enough, for example, or be rich enough to have the money to take care of yourself, whether it's your diet, your ability to exercise, or whether you have time because you have food on the table, as opposed to people who are unable to grasp and then get these things in general. They are unable to get these kind of benefit, and when they don't have food on the table, they cannot age gracefully in a way. I think the last way, I'll take a point before this. I'll take a point. Just wait. Okay. The last weighing then, that even if the narrative is in and of itself isn't objectively better, even if staying forever young insists a small marginal harm, we think it's still better to give choice and agency for people to choose. And the reason for this is that people have insanely different lived experience in a way that we can never define for them what's a better narrative for them to subscribe to. One might want a narrative for them to subscribe to one that they want to stay young because that is the motivation they need to still stay healthy, but other people might want to age gracefully because that is what they have a privilege to do. It was only under outside the house when we preserve the agency of the people and then the choice of people that matter, because it was the coexistence of narrative that we defend under outside the house. And I think the reason this kind of coexistence of narrative exists is because there's a diversification of media that already exists. When we look at the fast-changing social landscape, or when an anti-aging narrative gets pushed back by the competing natural and authentic brands, I think there's a balance that exists and what we see right now in the world. We think this is a much, much better thing and a much, much better comparative for we to defend. Opposition burden here isn't to prove that the narrative of Forever Young is better, but only that we ought not to abandon it, that is beneficial enough, even for a small group of people, for them to subscribe to and for them to express their lived experience in a way that matters to them. I think for all of these reasons, opposition.
If opposition wants to run that they want the elderly to remain relevant despite aging, then they can cross the House and sit on our side of the House. Because they cannot win this debate by mischaracterizing our side of the House. We have the right to define what it means and what our narrative means at the end of the day. What we told you as to what aging gracefully meant was to age by your own means. That it was self-defined, that it was something that was natural. Whereas on their side of the House, they were more likely to perpetuate this idea and continue to fuel the cosmetic industry and continue to fuel things like exploitative capitalism the moment they opt into like living forever and emphasizing this idea of remaining youthful, right? What they had to defend then was a world where you had to prioritize the idea of having to always be youthful, having to associate yourself with the physical traits of the youth as well, and constantly glorifying those traits as a whole. Two issues then, firstly on the lifestyle of the elderly, and secondly on who better benefits those individuals. Firstly, what do they tell you? They tell you that they're going to give this hope and ambition to these individuals. Firstly, I don't think this is true, right? Because they cannot just associate that ambition and hope is something that is only inherent to people who are young or people who are still like in their 20s, for example. And I think that this is just quite offensive to say that the elderly are absent of these characteristics. But secondly, they have to engage with the actual structural harms that the narrative perpetuates, not just the concept of itself that, hey, being youthful means that you want to be lively, means that you want to be ambitious, but they have to engage with the structural harms and how that narrative actually manifested. That is to say that they have to engage with how the cosmetic industry interacted with this, how capitalism interacted with this when they fueled and psychologically engineered demand for products, for surgeries, for things like Botox to remove wrinkles and to remain young. Those were the real structural harms that they actually had to engage with at the end of the day. But thirdly, I would like to reanalyze this, right? That we're not essentially accepting the decline, but rather we're saying that there is no decline, that your worth is not determined by your age, and even if you do age at the end of the day, that does not mean that you are devalued. What this means, that is to say then, that we're supporting a world where there is no decline, where you're aging naturally, and that is something that is inherent to you, and that is something that is beautiful in of itself. They perpetuate this then, and they perpetuate the worst harms, because they continue to say that having hope, that having ambition, that being lively is something that is only exclusive to those who are youthful, even though when it is not. That's exactly why they impose narratives upon people who are old and tell them that they cannot be someone for themselves, but rather they have to live within those ideals. Thirdly, what do they say then? They tell you about how only the rich and most privileged of individuals can access this at the end of the day. I don't think this is true, right? This is just counterintuitive to believe, because they perpetuate this on their side of the house. Look at the world in today, and that's the status quo that they have to defend. The status quo where massive beauty brands like monopolies like L'Oreal and Estee Lauder use slogans and rhetorics like having to turn back the clock, like reinforcing, like trying to turn back time and turn back the clock and like not aging at the end of the day. Those were the rhetorics that the companies use for their products to sell them. And all of these things were the ones that were making it inaccessible. Those were the brands that made it inaccessible to be able to opt into trends as somebody who is old, who still wants to be perceived positively in society. They are the ones who are probably stripping those individuals of their right to be able to express themselves and to be able to opt into trends, for example. Sure.
We see it in the status quo, people already favor other people who look good already, regardless of age. How is your case comparative?
No, this is not about whether or not people look good in general, right? This is about the perception of elderly based off of these two narratives and how they interact in the world, right? What we told you was that on our side of the house, having our narrative that you could age gracefully was a much better ideal because you could allow these individuals to be able to define their own means of aging and to be able to accept their beauty within aging in of itself. That having wrinkles is something that can be shed light upon and being seen as, for example, having smile lines mean that you've lived a good life and have good years, rather than being something that you have to get filler to cover up, which was their comparative on their side of the house. Lastly then, on my issue, I want to talk about they never really engaged about what PM told you on all of her points about how all of these companies psychologically engineer insecurities and monetize off of them. They never engage with the extent of harm that this caused at the end of the day. But also, this is something new that I'd like to bring up, that is also harmful for the elderly, right? Because all of these individuals on their side of the house would value these things like productivity and youth, and they would say that these are things that are not inherent to the elderly and something that they're unable to have, that they're unable to, for example, value things like experience and wisdom and having that emotional maturity from the years that you've lived. Instead, the way the elderlies are perceived on their side of the house are individuals who are stiff, who are tired, who are in their fixed mindset and are unable to be perceived positively in society. That's why PM told you about having a lack of public and elderly support. This was not about state incentives insofar as if the state had to opt into whatever the voter base wanted and they didn't respect the elderly enough, then they wouldn't get the political capital that they wanted to at the end of the day. Because it meant that what mattered the most was within the allocation of those resources. And insofar as the voter base did not agree with that, then they didn't get that political capital as well. What they also had to deal with on our side of the house was the job discrimination the elderlies had to go through. The fact that their voices would always be dismissed at the end of the day. That they would never have a society that was inclusive to those individuals and they would continuously stigmatize them. What we told you though was that we would accept that the aging is something that is beautiful, that the elderlies can define their own means in which they can be able to appreciate all of these things, that you don't have to psychologically engineer or, for example, have a broad narrative to define the means by which having somebody who is beautiful actually looks like. What they had to defend, though, was a loss of self-worth and a loss of value the moment that you were aging. You overshadowed things like, for example, long-term health priorities when you're constantly injecting yourself with all of those harmful things, when you're constantly piling your face up with the most harmful of cosmetics. This hinders your ability to even be able to enjoy your last years, for example, and be able to enjoy life to the fullest extent insofar as this narrative is very, very coercive on their side of the house and forces individuals to do things that they don't want to do. But lastly, I want to bring up a new point about how this actually harms the young people as well. Because the people who they're pinning this narrative upon isn't just the elderly, and it just doesn't just manifest within that sense, but it also harms the people who are young, that they already think that everything in that point in life is already very, very important when you're in your 20s, when you're getting your first job, when you've just graduated and got a degree. And now society is putting an extra pressure on you the moment they put this narrative upon you, that everything in that point in your life is so critical, that is the most crucial, that these are your prime years, and that's exactly when you put extra pressure on those individuals. That's exactly when you put extra pressure between, for example, job searching, for example, prioritizing their education, and therefore, on a metric, we win. Because the weighing that I'll give to you is that we prioritize the youth, that we prioritize the elderly, that we prioritize their lifestyle. What they told you is that they just mischaracterized our entire case, and they refused to engage within the premises of what this debate was actually about. Therefore, Prop wins on the last side. Proud to propose.
The problem with proposition is that they live in a really, really weird world. I don't know where it is. They live in a world where young people are the one with power in most societies and old people are just being neglected. Panel, just look at the world right now we're living in. Look at who's running the country, who's running the biggest corporations in the world. We are in a world that's run by old people that just has a system of respect who just keep giving them more and more power anyways. We say that half their case for old people being rejected simply does not matter. Second thing that we feel is really, really weird in their world is that they say that in their world there'll be more research about things like disease, like Alzheimer's research or whatever. My question is, why would a cosmetic company would divert their funds going to that department? I know we see that that's a very, very weird word where L'Oreal just goes into like Alzheimer's research. I don't think that's a word that like normal people do live in. I know. Let's just look at the questions in this debate. Then, firstly, there are just the framing in general. Firstly, what does like the narrative on propositions world look like? Because in their world, basically what they have to defend is a world where you have to age gracefully. What does it mean? On their side of the house, they're trying to just like cross their house and say aging gracefully means that you can do whatever when you're old. But panel, let's gut check this because on their side of the house, they already tell us that people reject older people. Then if old people choose to be old people, why would they be rejected to society? Why would they have the agency given to them by society to be able to do whatever they want? We say that this framing is very, very unrealistic, but we say that the most probable framing is what we're given to you in first. In first, we are told you that aging gracefully means that we embrace that aging is fine. It's normal to be more unhealthy. It's normal to be fatter when you are old because simply that's what the number of your age tells you that you should be able to be, and we embrace it. And we tell you that when the world lives under the narrative that it is fine to be old, people also internalize the idea that it's fine to be whatever that is. It's fine to just become more unhealthy as you get older, to become weaker as you get older, to be not like touching up to society with technology and other things when you get older. We say that in the world that looks like that, old people are just going to be left behind by society just to be like different to other people. And we say that the main problem right now in the world that they talk about ageism, the problem is that people don't like things that are different to them. For proposition to just embrace that aging gracefully, it should be the main narrative. It just says that these people are going to be different. What is it that we are actually defending on our side of the house then? On our side of the house, we say that old people can be whatever they are, like in the status quo. They can be old people who just want to be old. They can be old people who just want to be young. But that's not actually what it's about. We see that what is happening in the status quo is already a lot of research and funding. It's already going into like markets such as like health and whatever. Most of the narrative or most of the posts you see on social media that's targeted towards older people is probably on like anti-aging true. But what does it look like? We reject the premise that it looks like purely cosmetic purposes only. We say that health is also a big factor, and the weighing that health is. And the weighing is that we believe on opposition that there is a lot more emphasis on health. Why? Because people feel that it is a more proximate thing towards them. It's something that they can feel in themselves that health is integral to their lives, and they have like the harms of health is going to be a lot easier for them to recognize. So we say that with companies being so profit incentivized, that proposition says, we say that the narrative will probably tell old people to focus a lot more on health. We concede that there will probably be some money on cosmetics, so that's probably symmetric on both sides of the house. But the important thing here is the most important thing is health. Before I move on, sure.
If it's true that if people look down on people who have ages different to them, why is it a better idea to force these people who are elderly to force into the narratives that they are young rather than to just accept it and shift the societal perceptions to change that?
The problem with proposition is that they didn't listen to what my first speaker told you, that we want a world where both narratives do exist, and the important thing is that the old people themselves can choose how they live their own life. And the important thing that they also miss is that they just try to push on us a world where everyone just wants to be anti-aging. We don't think that's one, what the status quo looks like, and two, not what something that's very charitable to this debate. Second thing, then just moving on to like individual happiness, because it's probably a very important thing. How do you live your life and be happy? We say that the most important thing for you to live a happy life is you have to be able to choose on your own what is it that makes you happy. Because on proposition, well, you only have one narrative to tell you how to live your own life. We already told you in first that one is probably going to be unrealistic for many people, but two, we also going to tell you that it's probably not going to be everyone who wants to live in a world where they want to age gracefully. Maybe some people like the idea of being young and just want to do it. But guess what? On proposition, they're just going to reject these people, and society is just going to be like, these people are not something that's in like the mainstream narrative. These people are not like mainstream and people know them. And this also leads back to my analysis I told you, that when something is not like normal or something is not widespread, people do look down upon it. So we say that there will be a lot more people under side proposition who just have to be forced to either one, do things that they don't want and live their life not in accordance to their agency, but two, they might have to like go live their life, but it's not going to be a way that is realistic or that's going to be able to happen. So on the weighing, we say that on our side of the house, we just let people choose, and people themselves are the best metric of choosing what is best for them. Why? Because what guarantees and what tells you what is happy, the only thing that matters is your own experience. But on our side of the house, we tell you that we give these people the opportunity for them to be able to fulfill whatever their goals in life is, whatever the vision in their life is, and we prepare a society to embrace them into their older age. Third question then on societal impact. Because on their side of the house, there's been a very, very big push as to like on their side, they're going to put more research into health. We say that when the incentive of these companies do exist on both sides of the house, on their side of the house, there would probably be like cosmetics company who wants to capitalize off like what being older looks like. I think there's probably going to be a new beauty standard that comes up anyways, but also there is already a beauty standard in the status quo, and there's an internalized idea in most people that looking a certain way is good, that looking younger is good, but even if looking younger is good is gone, maybe there's also the Asian beauty standard that looking like an Asian or looking like a certain way is what is good. It's what society believes to be better anyways. So we say that on their side of the house, it's probably going to be very unlikely that these cosmetics company is going to go away, because when the profit incentive is so large, the only thing they're going to do is it's going to shift what they are doing to be able to capitalize off of the new trend. So overall, these things, we say we already mitigate what they say on their side of the house. But even if this is untrue, on their side of the house, they're going to say that there's going to be more money going to things like health. But my question here is that when you already embrace that being sick is normal, that when being older and weaker is normal, where is the incentive for you to actually go put this research into health? But in our world, where we tell you that for you to be able to be young, like the ability to be young is something that still matters, we are going to also put a lot more research into things like preventative care, into things like to stop things like Alzheimer's from happening in the very first place, because being young is probably you not having any of these diseases. So for that, we say that there's a lot more incentive on our side. So for all those reasons, we told you that we have a happier elderly population, but secondly, we have a society that embraces them. Opposition.
Panel, I think that side opposition has gotten the wrong debate in this motion, since they came up and talk about how both narrative could coexist, because the motion states that you would rather choose one in favor of the other. Therefore, they cannot debate in a world where aging gracefully and staying forever young both coexist on their side of the house, but rather what they had to defend was how staying forever young and traits like, for example, being energetic and looking like a young and having a baby face, for example, was much more preferable than being being mature and being able to like manage things properly and control your emotions rather than being spontaneous was much better. We told you that it was more harmful then because this devalues the opposite. Like for example, how like aging gracefully meant that you were able to be happy in every process, that you don't have to be pressured into this narrative to stay forever young and to have to opt into the societal pressure that tells you that you have to go get these Botox, these fillers and stuff like that at the end of the day. Therefore, we think that this is the point where we win this debate and we take this whole debate on side proposition. So two things I'll be doing in my debate. Firstly, on a few clashes, and secondly, on weighing them. So first clash, on the lifestyle of old people. I think that the thing that has been talked about a lot in this debate was their whole argument on hope and ambition, right? They told us that they wanted to give these old people to be able to have a chance to be hopeful and ambitious and be spontaneous or energetic. But NJ has already came up and told you that this was never really limited to being old. You can still be old and still be happy with your life and still be cheerful because you're enjoying life with your partner for the rest of your life, for example. You don't have to be energetic, you don't have to be spontaneous, but you can still be happy and you can still live life like that. No one is pressuring you to be that. However, on their side of the house, what they're telling us is they're demonizing these traits and they're demonizing the wrinkles and the natural things that happen on your face at the end of the day. Also, secondly, they wanted to push on the healthiness, right? But we told you that never really engage on the harm that we push to you on our side of the house. What we have told you then, we told you that these things look like, for example, getting more fillers, getting more Botox, because society, or for example, the mom group that you've gathered up, told you that, oh, you have to do Botox, you have to go to this clinic because you had to look young. And we think that this was harmful then to their health themselves because these harms, like getting all of these procedures done, could lead to, for example, skin cancer. It could lead to, like, for example, skin infection and stuff like that, which is harmful to the individual's health themselves when they don't have enough stuff to be able to do it professionally. And this is when we think it's really harmful because you're then pressured into doing this, and the harms that come with, you aren't ready to accept it, and it's just simply really harmful. So their whole point on health just falls down completely. But also on the comparative then, we told you that it was much more healthier on our side of the house because now you are able to have a healthy lifestyle. You're now able to be happy with who you are. You're now not pressured into competing with others on whether you or the other person look younger. And this is much better for your mental health. This means that you can now age gracefully, and now you can age with happiness, and you can live your life not having to worry about this competition, not having low self-esteem, and being fulfilled, and just being able to live your life like, gratefully. So, POI?
If Prop tries to push them spending money on cosmetics as a waste and you should spend on healthcare instead, should you ban wearing a tie?
I don't get your point. I'll move on then. But secondly, we also told you that on the PM's point, on the capital allocation, if DPM has a confusion of that, our point was just that this capitalistic narrative that people prey onto the self-esteem of these people to have to look young, this creates more profit in these industries, which means that the cream on the top, or the people who are actually really, really smart, goes into these industries instead of things like healthcare, instead of solving problems like, for example, finding the cure to cancer, which we think that this is really detrimental because now instead of solving like real life detrimental problems and real life threatening problems, you're now spending all these people who are really talented on healthcare instead. And we just think that this capital allocation on these detrimental problems would then decrease, which it just proves RPM's point on why development and research would then decrease on their side of the house. But also on the societal level, right? They cannot only come up and say that if they benefit a small amount of people, they will win this debate. Because the harm that we have proven to you and the harm that we have told you impacted the societal level. Why is this then? Because firstly, about the rich and poor thing that they wanted to talk about on their side, they wanted to say that our side, it was inaccessible to the poor. However, I want to flip this and tell you that it was even more expensive on their side of the house when these poor people are pressured to do these cosmetic, Botox and fillers and stuff like this. And if they weren't able to do, they'll be looked on by society, exploiting this inequality inequality, wealth gap, and even extended it furthermore, right? We think that this is even more harmful because now only the rich people will be able to look young because the poor didn't have money to afford these cosmetics. The poor didn't have money to afford these fillers to look young and beautiful. And what society tells you that look good, which we think that this is even worse on the poor on their side of the house. But also secondly, even if they were able to afford cosmetic, this means that they had to take up the opportunity cost of doing things like, for example, buying food on the table and providing for their family to take the money to do these fillers and Botox, which we think is really detrimental and which think is just really much worse on their side of the house for these poor people. But also secondly, on the discrimination on old people on this societal level, right? We also told you that there'll be a lot more work discrimination because, and this is not responded by the way, because the younger generation and the idea of forever young devalues old people and their traits. This means that they'll highlight things like, for example, when you go to interview, they'll decide to prioritize your spontaneity, how energetic you are, instead of how mature and how calm and how you can maturely decide in that situation, right? And we think that this is incredibly harmful because now you only accept certain groups of people. You don't listen to old people in work anymore. And we think that this is very important because now this leads to the younger generations not respecting the older people and not expecting things like, for example, the work experience and stuff that you have gained throughout the process, which we think that this is incredibly harmful then because the reason why Asian cultures cultivate around this is because these things come around, like, for example, the old people are the ones who have worked their asses off to give these young people a good lifestyle and to be able to give these people, these younger generations, for example, a country to live and fought for them and fought for their life and allowed them to live a graceful life, right? This is why we think that respecting elders should exist, and this is something that they have never defended all across their 2 speeches, and therefore this is a landslide debate, 2-side proposition. Never been prouder to propose.
Proposition already told you in Prop 1 that the ideal of what being young and being old looks like already exists in the status quo, and a lot is based on what you look like or what you are as older people. We say that on the status quo right now, people do understand that when you get older, you're probably going to look older. We understand that when you get older, you're probably going to get a lot weaker. But we say that on their side of the house, they have to defend a world where simply being young isn't what is going to happen. Just being young is something not for old people right now. But what actually is it that being young looks like? Because in their world, they give us a couple pieces of framing. One is just like how you act, you be a lot more energetic, you be a lot more creative, a lot more innovative, even when you, like, that's what the trait of a younger person looks like. But we say that the prerequisite to most of the things of what being young is probably tied a lot to the fact that you have health and you have a lot of energy to fulfill these things. And we say that on proposition, these are things that old people simply has to reject. They can't defend a world where they just want old people to just be really, really, really healthy. Because the image of what a healthy person looks like for nearly everyone in society is probably just someone being young, someone with like very, very big muscle, very, very youthful. That's what society already see young people to be. So in their world, the only thing they have to do is to reject it. But even then, their whole case just fails to engage on us because they're just trying to push upon us that we have to defend a world where we have to like stay forever young. We say that that's simply not what we have been doing since first opposition, and all the engagement have been failing because on our side we say that human agency is the most important aspect of humanity and human life. For you to be able to choose what makes you happy and just live the life the way you want, that's what makes you the most happy. And we say that in our side of the house it is better because we already told you that the way society reacts to you probably is very contingent on what this narrative looks like. Society is probably not going to accept someone who goes outside the narrative, like what they try to push throughout like their whole bench. We understand the mechanization that people do have a push against aging people. Why? Because we think that they are different. But on our side of the house, we preserve that. But then let's just look at like the different burdens in this debate then, because on their side of the house, the only burden is to try to say that why a world with only aging gracefully is the best world out there. We say that for 3 reasons, this is not the best world. Why? Just firstly, again, on the idea of human agency. Panel, if I want to ask you a question, what makes you the most happy? I know that everyone in this hall is going to come up with a different answer. Why? Because everyone in the world is different. There's no one narrative or no one way to make someone happy. So the best way is just to create a society with a narrative that accepts every single person, as my first speaker already told you. Just to try to make this a picture. Do you think it's better to have a life where you just try to stay healthy and hit the gym all the time, even when you're 60, or you just get old and fat drinking beer, just like go fishing? We say that there will be people who are happy to choose either things, and on our side of the house, we let them choose those two. But on their side, on like side government, they're only gonna let people choose option number 2 because option number 1 is probably gonna be associated in the status quo already with being younger. So we say that on like their side on our side of the house, we give people more choices. But second thing here is just how society interacts with these humans. We gave you the mechanization in second, that people probably fear things that are outside of that, not fear, like people demonize things that are outside of like the mainstream narrative, or people demonize things that like are just simply not what they see on an occurring basis. On their side of the house, when they try to push people into doing only one thing, they just fail on this because there's only one way that society believes that you should act as an agent in society. But we say that there is going to be many different ways, and there will be people who want to do other things, and these are going to be people who are demonized. And then they try to have a defense by saying that these like expectations or this narrative is going to be very, very skewed and very, very toxic. Let me ask you a question. If a narrative is so toxic towards someone who has so much power in society, why is it that people still accept it and people still want to live in a world in it? Imagine if you live in a world and you know that in 30, 40 years in the future, society is probably going to demonize you for your choices and want you to act in like a certain way. We say that people are probably not going to be able to, not going to live in that world anyways, and people are just going to create a narrative that is happening in the status quo of something that's a lot more balanced, of something a lot more acceptance. We said liberalization has been happening in every corner of the world anyways. Before I move on, POI.
People on your side would opt into Botox and fillers because their goal is to look young and beautiful, and it was the faster way. However, on our side of the house, people would not opt into these things because their end goal is to age gracefully or age with like healthily.
Panel.
Please engage.
People want to look good on either side of the house. Everyone just wants to look a certain way. On their side of the house, basically their burden is to prove that cosmetics simply will not exist anymore. Panel, that is not something that age plays a factor in. Just because I am Asian, I am obligated to look a certain way anyways, irregardless of my age. We say that on their side, the whole argument of cosmetic and research simply just fall. Let me just move on secondly then to just how the societal aspect. Because on their side of the house, they're trying to run that when you age gracefully, you allow people to come into the workforce. Panel, but here's the question. When you already accept that old people are different from you, that they are probably going to have older people traits, like being like weaker or whatever, why did you want them to work alongside you? We tell you that is simply not a narrative we want to defend. And in our world, there are already existing infrastructure to be able to give education to the older people, to be able to give like opportunity inclusivity in workforce to older people already in the status quo. And we say that people already respect old people from the experience, from the knowledge that they already have And we see that most countries, look at France increasing the minimum, the retirement age by 5 years. We see Thailand is also trying to do the same. We see that the integration of older people into the workforce is already happening on either side of the house. But the problem then is that if we consider on their side of the house, there is going to be like a narrative that old people are okay to work. But the problem is the narrative is never going to stop there. Why? Because think about it. You are like a son or daughter of like an older person. There is a social narrative that old people can be able to work and can be an effective part of society. Why is it that you want your parents to be a burden upon you? Why would you not send them away to go to work? But we say in our side of the house, when we allow people to choose and we accept that you can be old and you can just when you can be old and you can just retire, do whatever there in life, you're simply not going to stick to the one and only narrative that dictates you. And lastly, then on just conclude the point on opposition, we tell you that the way you live your life matters. Not matters in the term of what society wants you to live like, but matters in the sense where you can choose your own path, choose what makes you happy, and go to that goal with society accepting you. For all those reasons, opposition.
ฮัลโหลขอเสียงตบมือให้กับน้องๆทุกท่านอีกรอบนึงนะครับแล้วก็ขอบคุณน้องๆทุกคนสำหรับเนื้อหาที่เข้มข้นแล้วก็เต็มไปด้วยความคิดสร้างสรรค์นะครับสิ่งที่เราได้ฟังไปเมื่อตะกี้นี้เป็นมากกว่าคำตอบตายตัวเรื่อง staying forever young หรือว่า aging gracefully หรือเป็นมากกว่าผลแพ้ชนะก็ตามแต่สำหรับผมเนี่ยมันคือการที่เราหรือการที่ดีเบตเองได้ชวนให้เราคิดต่อตั้งคำถามแล้วมองปัญหาจากหลายมุมไม่ว่าจะเป็นในเชิงพาณิชย์ในเชิงสังคมหรือในเชิงหลักการนะครับสุดท้ายนี้เนี่ยผมอาจจะขอฝากตัว Thailand National Debate Team ไว้ให้ทุกคนนะครับตัว QR Code เนี่ยก็คือเป็นหน้า IG ของเราเลยที่สามารถติดตามความคืบหน้าของน้องๆเวลาน้องไปแข่งต่างประเทศปีนี้เราจะมีแข่งที่เคนยาตอนช่วงกลางปี 2024 ในนามทีมชาตินะครับแล้วก็อีกอย่างที่ผมจะขอฝากคือถ้าทุกท่านสนใจสนับสนุนทีมชาติที่เป็น non-profit เราทำไม่แสวงผลกำไรเนี่ยเรามีเสื้อมาขายนะครับเป็น TNT supporter WSCC Thailand supporter เนี่ยนะครับติดต่อผ่าน IG ได้เลยจะมีฟอร์มสำหรับกรอกซื้อจัดส่งไปถึงบ้านนะครับหรือว่าถ้าวันนี้ทุกคนสะดวกสนใจสนับสนุนพวกเราเลยเราก็มีสต็อกมาส่วนหนึ่งติดต่อด้านข้างเวทีได้ครับเพื่อไม่เป็นการเสียเวลาผมขอบคุณทุกท่านที่อยู่ฟังดีเบตที่เข้มข้นทั้งหมด6 speech นี้นะครับแล้วก็ขอเสียงตบมือให้กับทีมชาติไทยครั้งสุดท้ายครับ
ขอเสียงปรบมือกับทุกคนบนเวทีเลยเยาวชนของเรานะคะขอบคุณผู้จัดการทีมด้วยน้องนิรุตติจารุไพศาลกิจขอบคุณฝ่ายเสนอด้วยนะคะสาริสาพึ่งรัตน์อภิชดาชาวสวนอาซิสจันจิงอึงแล้วก็ฝ่ายค้านของเราสกลพัฒน์เอี่ยมเสมอเพชรกิจชอเอกชัยนะคะเห็นแล้วท่านเลือกข้างได้ไหมท่านจะเลือกหนุ่มสาวตลอดกาลหรือว่าอยากแก่สมวัยนะคะวันนี้จริงๆแล้วเป็นหนึ่งในฟิโลโซฟีที่เราจะทำให้ทุกท่านได้ตระหนักด้วยนี่คือหนึ่งในเซสชันที่เราได้ตระหนักรู้รวมถึงนะคะท่านก็จะได้มีความคิดที่เรียกได้ว่าแตกต่างจากเดิมที่ท่านได้มีความคิดเห็นของตัวเองนี่คือผลงานเรียกว่าเมล็ดพันธุ์ใหม่ของคนไทยของเราซึ่งน้องๆเป็นตัวแทนของเรียกว่าประเทศไทยของเราในการประกวดนะคะการโต้วาทีหรือว่าดีเบตระดับ global กันนะคะปรบมือกับประชาชนสำหรับน้องๆทุกๆคนรวมถึงผู้จัดการทีมเอาใจช่วยสำหรับทุกๆคนเลยทุกคนทุกท่านคะสำหรับดีเบตของเราจะมีทุกวันนะคะแล้วก็เป็นวันที่หลายๆท่านนั้นอยากจะมาเยี่ยมชมกันอย่าลืมแวะมาด้วยในช่วงเวลาวันไฮไลท์ดีเบตกันเวลาประมาณ 18 นาฬิกาและเซสชันนี้ก็มี QR code ให้เช่นกันนะคะขอบคุณน้องๆทั้ง6ท่านด้วยขอบคุณผู้จัดการทีมด้วยนะคะผู้จัดการทีมนี่คือเป็นหนึ่งในเยาวชนที่ประกวดระดับประเทศมาแล้วนะคะก็กลายเป็นเมนเทอร์เป็นโค้ชต่อไปให้ทิปส์แล้วก็เรียกว่าให้กำลังใจสำหรับน้องๆในทีมกันเล็กสุดอายุ 13 ขวบเท่านั้นเองที่จะเป็นผู้โต้วาทีหรือว่าแข่งระดับโลกกันนะคะ